What's up, guys? Legacy here, and I do want to give a special warning before you guys watch this episode. My audio kind of gets really bad. I think halfway through my Razer Seiren kind of died. Do bear with me on the audio, and I do apologize in advance. But I do hope you still enjoy this episode. Thanks for watching. What's up, everybody? Legacy here with another episode of Wild on the Rift, and today I have an amazing, huge guest for you guys. It is Excoundrel. Say what's up to everybody.
Hey dude, how's it going? Glad to be here. We go back a long way, all the way back through Vainglory, so I'm pretty happy to be chatting to you today.
Absolutely. So first off, introduce yourself to maybe the people who don't know you from the MOBA community. Go ahead and give them a little background about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Excoundrel, and I started off actually as a League of Legends caster in the UK primarily. So I did a lot of UK events, eventually transitioned to doing European events. And then somehow, as Vedius was leaving Vainglory, I was recommended and entered Vainglory as a caster, and then I kind of decided to build my credibility as an analyst in Vainglory. I would build a YouTube channel, and I did the YouTube channel. I basically just did Vainglory analysis, mostly using mathematical stuff, and I grew relatively quickly and kind of made a little bit of a small name for myself in Vainglory, and have kind of hopped from game to game ever since. But I have been casting loads of games, actually. I've done a lot of games in my casting career, but have always primarily focused on League of Legends on the PC.
Right on. So you've come a long way since so from League back to MOBAs on the phone, and now back to League on the phone again. Like, is that exciting for you? Did you ever think that, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago there would be like a mobile version for League?
I didn't even think mobile MOBAs would have been taking off 6 or 7 years ago. I think once I was into Vainglory and I saw, the relative success of Vainglory, but really I saw the success of Mobile Legends and kind of saw how big that was. And then obviously then Honor of Kings. And then, we saw things done well with Mobile Legends and Honor of Kings in China. We saw things done badly with Vainglory and AOV, but nonetheless, I knew that mobile gaming was going to be a big deal. And then I heard rumors 3 or 4 years ago that League of Legends were developing their own mobile MOBA, so it's been in the works for quite some time. And so I kind of was very excited. I always thought that the end game of my channel would be Wild Rift, or I didn't know that it was called Wild Rift at the time, but I always knew it would be a League of Legends mobile related thing. So yeah, I was super excited to get my hands on Wild Rift and start playing.
Awesome. I mean, and you've been from the PC to the MOBA version, and you said that you've had that hope for a while. So now that it's here, talk about the PC and mobile contrasts, and how has Wild Rift met or exceeded your expectations?
Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously they are designed to have the products are designed to do two different things. Like League on your PC is always going to be that sit down and play for 45 minutes in a game, appeals to the very hardcore kind of dedicated fan base. They've got plenty of game modes in there. It's a lot about playing with your friends, etc. And Wild Rift is still quite, I would say it's a shell. Wild Rift is still a shell that needs to be filled out. But I was over the moon with how it played compared to a lot of the other mobile MOBAs that I played. Obviously, I'm going to take Vainglory out of the equation because the control system made it wildly different to the rest of the mobile MOBAs that I've played. But for a joystick MOBA, I think it plays incredibly well. So I just want, as soon as I got my hands on it, I thought mechanics, they're there. The outplay potential is there. The familiarity and the play style of League of Legends is still retained. And the games are suitably short for a mobile platform. So when I played it, I absolutely loved it. And obviously the game is shorter. The gold income's much higher. They reworked some abilities to make them work for the twin stick controls. They've reduced the levels overall for champions, so they've had to rework how those levels scale because every ability now only has 4 levels as opposed to 5. So there's lots of big tweaks, but I think they've managed to do it very successfully. And I actually think the Wild Rift product is really good, and it's only going to get better from here, considering it is still in beta. There is still some stuff I'd love to be improved,
Matchmaking,
but I was really happy with how it turned out.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think it's been really fun. I've played the beta all the way from the first beta to now, and the servers are getting better, the gameplay is getting better. And if everyone was watching on Twitter and then also YouTube yesterday, the big Riot announcement of the 2021 esports for mobile, everyone's really excited for that. So as someone who's been in the mobile industry for a while and worked with the LEC, what would you think would be the best path for an organic and healthy sustainable growth for that esports scene to develop, since you've been through pretty much, you talked about the good and the bad of like all the other mobile titles?
So I've always had a couple of thoughts about this, and when you've got someone like Riot backing your products, then that's why I was so overjoyed to hear in the 2021 announcement that Riot are going to be involved in esports, because that's, it's nice to have developer-backed esports. But I think you have to learn from the mistakes that the likes of AOV and Vainglory made. Both AOV and Vainglory made big mistakes in the way that they handled their esports. They tried to pump money in it before they had the player base to sustain the interest. They spent so much money on making these wild European and North American focused events, especially, when actually they were completely negating where the majority of their player base was likely to take hold, which is the Southeast Asian audience. So I think for Riot, I think monitor the player base, see what your engagement like, see what your retention's like. Have you got enough players to healthily invest in the esports scene? If you don't, then or at least support third-party organizations like Wild Rift Competitive. I know they're doing a lot right now. I know Team Liquid have got their eyes on doing some stuff. I would say focus on Southeast Asia to begin with, because I think that's going to be where your main audience will be. And obviously then start to expand into North America and Europe if it makes sense. The one problem that Vainglory and AOV had is they went hard on North America and Europe, because as an audience, they're worth more money. Like one individual from Europe and North America is worth more than one individual from Southeast Asia, just from a pure advertising and spending and revenue point, right? But like, if the interest isn't there, it doesn't matter how much money you put up for grabs. We saw from Vainglory and AOV, it just doesn't work. It doesn't make your game successful. So bring North America and Europe into light when it makes sense. Don't make it ridiculous. Focus primarily on building the game's player base, and then think about esports. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we've learned from both League, but also seeing the failures of VG and AOV esports, and that you have to focus on the game and the player base first, and then work on esports when it makes sense. So that would be like my primary goal. But I would love them to focus on Southeast Asia to begin with, because I think that's where your core player base is going to be. And that's probably where you're going to be able to work out how you want Wild Rift esports to go. And then when you have, or if you have, a player base in North America or in Europe, to make something beyond just like world qualifications, for instance. Because obviously, if there's going to be worlds, you're going to have world qualifications for those regions. But you're not going to set up a mini LEC for the Wild Rift in Europe if you just don't have the player base or the viewership to sustain that. So yeah, I think I want them to focus on generating and retaining players first, and then esports could come afterwards.
Do you think that was part of their concept and roadmap then? Because they did start in the Asian region for the beta releases, and then slowly moving west on there. Maybe you're on to something there. So maybe you guys had a call prior to this call a long time ago about that. But I do agree. No, I do agree.
Yeah, I agree. I just think most people, you don't even need to do much market research to realize that the MOBA market is Southeast Asia, and Asia, and like the East Asian audience in general, like Korea, China, Japan, Southeast Asian countries. Like, it's clear that is your primary audience, because mobile gaming isn't quite what it is in North America and Europe as it is in Southeast Asia yet. And I'm hoping Wild Rift is the kind of brand that can get that to happen, especially in North America. Like, every YouTube video I put out is like, I can't play it yet. I can't play it yet. It's not out in North America. So I'm hoping like the Wild Rift brand with Riot backing is enough to try and sway and bring in a North American player base. And we've got a healthy player base on Europe already. But I think, obviously, from what me and Southeast Asia is going to be your primary audience.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Honor of Kings, they've always smashed like the analytical numbers for that region. So I mean, definitely China's something. Huge for that. They're huge for that. So let's move on to the next topic here. So someone who's came from like Vainglory and AOV, Mobile Legends, they kind of have an idea of how to play a mobile. But I'm hoping, and I think maybe Riot is too, that with this being a major IP title, that maybe some new people will come into the mobile scene just because it's Riot in League of Legends. So maybe they have heard of it and they never played a game like this. If someone's new to Wild Rift, do you have any tips for beginners or anything like that? And like, what kind of places do you think they should go to for avenues for like information?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting I think, for new players, especially coming from League of Legends, because I found that a lot of players that have come from League of Legends, from the PC version over to Wild Rift, have got the experience necessary to really get into the game and take hold of it well. So what I found that if you've come from League PC, you've kind of hit the ground running when it comes to Wild Rift. And I found a lot of those guys are really just getting used to the controls, but they know how the meta plays out. They know which champions go where. That's the kind of stuff that they don't need help with. But when you're completely new to Wild Rift, like you're completely new to League, let's say you're coming in, but you're familiar with the control scheme, you know how twin stick MOBAs work, but you don't know anything about the League of Legends meta, then obviously the best way to get involved is obviously get through that tutorial stuff, get through all that rubbish, but then get out into content creator streams. What I would say is that once you're familiar with the game, Twitch streams like Clamares and Assassin Dave and stuff like that, those guys are good once you kind of already understand what's going on. But if you don't understand what's going on, you're going to want to get involved with some YouTube content, because that's generally where more beginner-focused content comes from. My channel, specifically Excoundrel, I do quite a lot of beginner and explaining guide type content. But I know there are other channels out there that do similar stuff. So I would just get onto YouTube, go and look at some tier lists, sort of look through why people are explaining which champions are good, talk about how the meta is played out, look at some beginner guides, and just get to grips with it that way. And then once you feel comfortable, move on to those Twitch streams, watch high elo players playing it out, look at what the meta shapes up like in their games, and also try, if you can, and watch the competitive scene, because if you're really interested, that's where you're going to see the absolute top flight of play, and that's where you're going to understand how the game is played at its absolute best level.
Yeah, because you'll get the different meta builds, the counters. What I like about your channel is you're probably one of the only people that I've seen that has consistently put out a meta tier list from all the way up to now to the newest patch release. And can you kind of go through why that's important for like a new player to understand what a meta tier list is?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the meta is that realistically, as I say in all of my tier lists, anything can win in League of Legends. So if you're coming in as a bronze or a silver player, like, if you have a favorite champion, definitely stick to it. Because the one thing that trumps any kind of meta tier list is comfort on a champion. Like understanding how the champion works, understanding which abilities you need, what items you need to function. That trumps everything. But once you get to a certain point, and I usually say it's about the gold/platinum threshold, you need to start to understand that some champions are just better than others. And it's not through any fault of your own or any fault of your play. It's just with the way the balance is right now. And so there are some champions that will just start to feel obnoxious to play against. And you've got to understand which champions are good and which champions are not. And that's where meta tier lists come in and help. If you're really serious about climbing ELO, if you're really serious about climbing the Wild Rift ladder, you need to get to grips with how the meta is played, because it'll A, help you understand what the enemy might pick and potentially how to counter it, but B, also help refine your champion pool, which is what we call we call your champion pool like your collective number of champions that you feel comfortable playing. And that's where meta tier lists come in to help, because you can be like, oh, okay, this champion, let's say, okay, Evelyn, I like playing Evelyn. Oh, wow, she's like really good in mid lane right now. Okay, let me learn how to do that. And suddenly that really helps you kind of accelerate your ranked climb and accelerate how you play the game. But also just keeping up on top of the meta tier lists also helps you understand how the balance is changing, and also means it ensures you aren't left behind. So when a patch happens, get involved and watch one of those meta tier lists to understand how the game has changed, so you aren't kind of playing a champion that got nerfed too heavily or whatever, you know?
Speaking of patches, Wild Rift just dropped the new 2.0 with new Yordles in there. How excited or not excited are you for legendary Teemo joining the game? As a PC player, we all know how much of a troll that pick can be.
I think so. I don't know if I made a video the other day talking about Teemo, and they switched one of his abilities with his passive. So on the PC version, Teemo has a passive that allows him to go invisible when he's stood still. And he can also go invisible when he's in brushes and move around. His third ability, which is what we call his E ability on the PC, is the ability that allows him to apply poison when he does basic attacks. Well, in Wild Rift, they switched that to his passive. So now his passive is that he applies poison on his basic attacks, and his third ability is the one that allows him to go invisible. The problem is, on the PC version, you had to spend your ability level up points on your third ability, because that increased the damage that you dealt with basic attacks, which meant that your other damaging ability, which is your first ability, didn't get as many points in it. Now that it's your passive, you can just put points in your first ability, and you're going to deal an obscene amount of damage in lane. And everybody that knows, or everybody that's played against Teemo, especially in the Baron lane, knows he is obnoxious to play against, like absolutely obnoxious. He's a really bad champion in team fights. Like, Teemo is terrible in team fights, but in lane, he is obnoxious. And I think that's one of the things that I think people are going to be a little bit scared about. So I'm very curious to see how that ability swap's going to play out. I feel like in low elo, Teemo is going to stomp because team fights aren't as coordinated. But I feel like in the higher elos, Teemo might not be as good as other champions, just because when you pick Teemo into the Baron lane, you sacrifice what the Baron lane often provides, which is either a tanky frontline, like utility, like an engage or stun or whatever. Teemo doesn't have any of that. Teemo is just damage and an annoying laner. So yeah, I think he'll be a bit of a low elo menace, honestly, Teemo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think he's going to be a low elo menace. I'm building Leandries plus his poison. Like, it's going to be annoying with the invisibility. Like, it's going to be new for people getting into the game. So we kind of touched on the current meta and the current patch. Let's move on to initiative. So one of the questions that Draggles put out to me to kind of ask everybody is, what are some of the initiatives that Riot can do to help content creators such as yourself? And I've gotten a lot of cool responses, but I'm actually really intrigued to see what you're going to say as someone who's come from all the way various levels in the mobile scene. What do you think would help and benefit new content creators or well-seasoned content creators?
Well, Ben, as Draggles, by the way, I've known Draggles for years. He actually grew up near me. Ben, what you can do to help us is learn from other mobile games, creator codes. Quite clearly, I think you'll get a lot of people suggesting that creator codes in the shop are always going to be extremely useful. Placement of videos or whatever in a tab or on the client somewhere is obviously going to be massive for boosting traffic to certain channels. I think asset packs, oh my god, please give me asset packs. I need images for my videos and for my thumbnails, and if I could get those provided to me in like a Google Drive, that would be amazing. Please give me asset packs. I'd love to get some kind of PBE up and running. There are people like Yikes who somehow, and I have no idea how they do it, they get access to like new champions, I think through manipulating the APK in some ways, that they can get access to timed release champions and skins before they're actually able to come out. I can't do that. Not every content creator has access to that. And so like a PBE or some kind of test server is a big investment, probably very far down the line, but that would be amazing to have access to. What else? Skin and wild core giveaways for social media channels. Obviously, that's one of the things that worked really well for me in Vainglory, is when they did the ice giveaways for content creators on social media. That was a huge boon to my social media presence in that particular game. So, if we can get something like that, that would be absolutely fantastic. Social media support for content on whatever channel it may be, even if it's a little nod towards an esports stream or a little nod towards a particular video that was interesting or useful for the player base. What else would be good? What League PC has done is given out specific skins that are unique to content creator giveaways. So they have these things called chromas, which are basically like recolors of certain skins. And they have a unique one that is only accessible through content creator giveaways, I think. So that'd be fantastic, like unique content creator giveaway stuff. Again, very far down the line, but these are just all ideas that I'm spitballing out of my head. So yeah, I think there's lots of things that Wild Rift can do to support content creators if the scene is big enough to allow it.
One of the best things that you mentioned there that no one else has mentioned is asset packs. I think that is very vital, very important. You get the high res graphics so you can make your thumbnails. If you're a tournament organizer like me, you'd love to have like the best and the greatest graphics to use as well. I do like the creator codes. I think maybe one other person mentioned that. But all very
I bet
valid
full
things.
frontage, because full frontage's Twitter is code full frontage.
So we'll definitely like I love like that's a really cool like content creator roadmap. So hopefully Ben watches this and he's taking notes if they don't already have those plans in the works. So you did mention the chromas that are on PC, really cool concept. What other things would you like to be added that are on the PC version to the mobile version?
Well, I think the number one thing, if the player base were to allow it, is some kind of role queue for ranked. I think that's everybody's biggest like wish list right now. Like I can't tell you the amount of games that I've gone into where I've been support and my friend has been playing AD carry, and we just queue into another duo bot lane, and the game is ruined because both of us want to go duo bot lane, and then no, everyone's out of role, and it just doesn't work. Especially when you're at like Emerald and Diamond level, like no one plays every role at that level, you know, sufficiently. So it can get a bit messy. So role queue is definitely one of the biggest I think peeves for everybody in the current. But I think the reason they haven't done it is because you can't implement that when you've got a low player base. I'm not saying they've got a low player base, but obviously if they had a lower player base and they'd implemented it from the start, you might have had queues for some people that were going on for 10 minutes. And I think one of the things that is a big balance for mobile creators is because on the PC, you set your PC queue and you leave it and no one cares most of the time. But on a mobile, especially when you're on the go or you have limited time, you can't give people 10-minute queues because they can't, it's not it doesn't work for them. Like, you know, when you've got that limited amount of time, like it's all about getting you into a game that's as fair as possible, as quickly as possible. And that's where role queue actually kind of ruins that a little bit if you don't have the player base to support every single role in the game. And obviously support is generally the role that gets a little bit left behind in role queue most of the time. What else would I like to see from the PC version? Hextech crafting, like the Poro chests are cool, and they're Wild Rift's version of Hextech crafting, but they feel a little lackluster. Like I feel like it's too slow to get Poro coins. So either increase the drop rate of Poro coins, or bring something a little bit more along the lines of Hextech crafting. Hextech crafting's got this really cool thing where I think it's based on your honor, which is how you like, it's kind of like the badge of how well you behave in game. So based on your honor level and based on how you perform, you get access to these things that allow you to unlock unique skins and unique cosmetics. I'd love to have that for Wild Rift. And in fact, I'd love to have some kind of good behavior reward system for Wild Rift, because obviously we all know about banning trolls and, you know, AFK detection, that kind of stuff. But I'd love to have some kind of good behavior reward system. So if you don't misbehave, if you don't get reported things, you get some reward that would be nice. What else would I say? Just recently in ranked, they've brought out LP prevention loss when you have an AFK. This doesn't really work for Wild Rift because we have that kind of tier system where you go up to, until you get to Diamond anyway. All the way up to Diamond, they have that little thing where you get like a little notch in your rank and then it ranks you up. And I think from the lessons that we learned from Vainglory is if you have complete AFK protection, everybody gets artificially inflated and you have like a really overpopulated higher tier system, which is why you can't do AFK protection, unfortunately, because it like artificially inflates the skill level of everybody in the player base. But what you can do is, especially at Diamond and above, where LP actually comes into play, is do something that the PC has just implemented, which is have this, if you have an AFK, which is common because it's a mobile game, I've had loads, then it kind of reduces how much LP you lose. So you don't lose, you still lose LP, but you don't lose as much LP as you would have done, which could be useful, especially for the higher tier players as we go on. What else would I love to see from the PC version? Nothing springs to mind right now, but those are the few things that I'd like to see.
I do like the LP reduction, and I think one of the things that might make it tough is how does the, I guess, AI detect, like how long do they have to be? Because I've had people leave a game, reconnected. I've reconnected to games, and I hope I don't like have like a 60-hour wait time now to play. Like there's definitely got to be a balance between that. But
yeah, I agree.
Definitely, if someone's trolling down mid lane and running it down, they definitely need to get their LP removed. You
can't implement it as harshly as the PC version because, as you correctly said, when you're on a phone, stuff happens. You get a phone call, your phone crashes, the app closes, you accidentally press something and it takes you out of the app and you've got to reload in. Like all that kind of stuff happens on phone, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you can't be as harsh. What I would like though is some kind of, when you join a match and someone is clearly not connected for a number of minutes, or they're AFK for a number of minutes, I would like to have the remake system in. But I just don't know how it would apply to a mobile audience. Maybe they wouldn't be happy with that, because on the PC version, if someone doesn't connect for the first 3 minutes, you can vote to remake, and it basically cancels the game. So no one gets any LP, or no one gets a loss and no one gets a win, basically. It does waste everyone's time, but it is fair to the losing team because they had someone that just didn't connect. The problem with the Wild Rift is, like, at what time threshold would you set that, given that the games are on average about 2.5 times as quick, or 2 times as quick as the PC version? Like, what time threshold are you going to set for someone to not connect or to connect, to have the AFK loss prevention and stuff? But yeah, I don't know. I think as you correctly said, it's difficult to make it work on phone because the platform is much more susceptible to having these little things go wrong.
Absolutely. And maybe that's something they're thinking about in the future. We just don't know what's going on in the minds of the devs here. So with the massive announcement of the esports, we've already seen some orgs enter the scenes, and we've seen some big tournament prize pools. I'm on the side that thinks that, you know, orgs entering the scene inflates things, and big prize pools already kind of inflates things. What is your perspective on that? Do you think that orgs entering the scene so early is good or bad? But I did like what you know, INTZ did. They entered, but they have a content team. So I like that concept. Like, what are your thoughts on?
I like the content team, yeah, and also Tribe are doing something similar. They had some content people on as well, I believe. So yes, I think I agree with you to the sense that it depends on how it's executed. So what we saw in, like, AOV and Vainglory was that the developer made it possible for them to hire teams, but they also gave them money to have salaries. And as, like, I think a lot of people realize from both AOV and Vainglory, the scene wasn't able to sustain salaries, like, for very long. So teams were never going to make any money because the viewership on the actual games wasn't high enough. And they also had set an expectation for players that they were going to get these ridiculous salaries that the scene just really wasn't able to support. So I think teams entering the game is good to create hype as long as it's executed on properly. If a team enters with a load of money and they invest a load to buy out players and give them big salaries, I think that's bad, because we have no idea how the game's going to go. We don't know if Wild Rift Esports is going to be successful. We hope it is, but again, it's a big gamble, because to really be successful in esports, you have to be successful primarily in North America and Europe, because the audience is worth a lot of money, and that's where most people are going to spend. And that's how you make your money in esports, even though I could go into a whole tirade about how esports isn't really making much money at all right now, but I won't. But yeah, you need to, it just needs to be sustainable. So content teams are great. Like, get a content creator on, support their content creation, lift up content creation in the scene. Coming in and, like, throwing your money around and either creating ridiculous prize pools for tournaments. Not that I've seen any tournaments that I think have got ridiculous prize pools for Wild Rift specifically, but I had seen it in AOV and Vainglory. Or just giving, like, teams ridiculous salaries that are unsustainable for the current level of the esports scene. I think that is bad, because the teams just get burned and they don't want to come back because of their decisions that they made. So I think as long as it's a sustainable entry, and it's either through content creation or picking up a team for like limited salary options, you know, like, I don't think any player is going to be coming out here expecting like 2 or 3K a month for playing Wild Rift that doesn't even have a competitive scene. But, you know, if you're giving a team like a token amount retainer type stuff, and like these guys that have never been involved in esports at all, and you just say, look, $200 a month, you play under our brand, and we can renegotiate when things, you know, when things actually kick off. That's fine. Like that's fine, as long as you're not tying the players into these ridiculously long contracts for $200. That you know, that to me seems like an okay way to enter. But I think I agree with you in the sense that we have seen it happen before, where these big orgs have come in and it's been awful because just the scene has not been able to sustain them, because it's just not big enough to warrant the level of investment that these teams are putting in.
Yeah, and I think another big thing is, man, I just had it on my, you just mentioned something and I was gonna elaborate on it, but anyways, since I forgot it, that's fine. But yeah, I do think the inflation of, you know, salaries and stuff. Oh yeah, that's what it was. So inflation of salaries, but also you mentioned that $200. Very important, guys. Read your contracts. Like, don't just jump on because oh, you know, I got Cloud9's gonna, I'm signing with Cloud9, and you just sign it. You know, you want to read your contracts because you don't want to get screwed over, like, and then you read the fine print and it's 3 years later you sign a 3-year contract. That'd be massive, a long time. But we'll just say a year and a half, and then the scene's big. You just won this big tournament, or you're playing in these tournaments, and then you're like, why can't I renegotiate my contract? Because you need to read your contract. So don't burn yourself.
Yeah.
Do not burn yourself.
I fully agree with you, dude. Like, and I've done this for players before. I did it in Vainglory. If you want to follow me on Twitter, if you have any worries about a contract, send it to me and I'll read it for you and I'll see if I can see anything. I've done it for people before, and I agree with you in the sense that just don't, like, as I said, I don't think teams should be offering big salaries for Wild Rift, if salaries at all, by the way, because they just don't know if the scene is there to sustain it right now. But don't go in and say, oh my God, Cloud9, Liquid, whatever, they're offering me a contract to be a player, and then you sign yourself in for like $100 a month for 3 years, but then the scene blows up in 6 months' time. You're a big brand in the scene, you're still being paid $100 because you can't renegotiate your salary. So just don't sign anything you haven't got checked over. Think about the future. Don't sign anything. I would almost always say, unless you're being offered the most ridiculous deal in the world, don't ever sign anything long term. But yeah, look, I just think I agree with you. Just be very cautious about signing anything when it comes to esports, and especially for an emerging scene like Wild Rift.
So for someone who's been on the front of the camera on multiple games, what are your focuses now? Are you mainly going to be a content creator to help educate the new players? Would you like to be on, like, say there was an LEC for the European version? Would you like to be a host, an analyst? What are your kind of goals for Wild Rift in your future?
So I would like to be a caster. Primarily, I'd like to be an analyst or a color caster. I think do what I did in Vainglory. In League PC, I'm a play-by-play caster, which is the guy that kind of shouts about the action and gets hyped. But for Wild Rift, I play it enough and I understand the game enough that I'd like to be back on the analyst and the color commentator role. I don't want to be a pro player, mainly because I have a family and I cannot invest the time to be necessary to be good enough, let alone with scrims and all practices and stuff to even warrant thinking about being a pro player. But I think focusing for me is going to be on casting and content creation. And I did say to some friends that I wouldn't mind thinking about doing coaching down the line if it presented an opportunity, presented itself. But I think for the first part, I'm going to be focusing on sort of the broadcast roles and content creation.
I love it. And that kind of, for someone who's been so seasoned into it, there's going to be a lot of new people hopefully coming into the scene. They're going to start hosting their own tournaments and community events like that. What kind of advice could you give to someone who's just passionate about it? They've seen it, they want to try it. Like, what can they do to help, make the presentation good? If they're nervous, like, what are some tips that you could give?
This is a question that actually I get asked a lot in pretty much every podcast that I ever do, just because it's very similar to kind of like the advice people want to hear, but it's a really difficult question to answer. And every time I kind of say that, it's all about practice. If I go back and listen to the way I sounded 7 years ago, I cringe listening to myself. It's taken years to get to a point where I feel confident talking in front of a camera. I have the tonal control to make my voice sound interesting. My voice is very deep and very kind of like resonant. And when I used to cast, I never varied the pitch or the tone, and I just sounded like a monotonous, like, robot. Like, I really did. And so it's taken years to really understand how to articulate my voice properly, to make it sound interesting to listen to. So you're not just listening to someone that is slapping you with some kind of baritone, monotone voice. But a lot of it just came from practice, and that practice came from getting involved in community tournaments. And I think one of the big things that a lot of casters that I've seen have struggled with is that because they think the industry is mature, they want to come in and immediately get paid for work, or they want to come in and immediately be compensated in some way. And honestly, I would love that for that to be the case, where every job can be compensated, but that's just, the scene just isn't able to support that, especially in emerging esports scenes. So I'm even doing free casting in Wild Rift, and I've been doing this for 7 years. That's because I just love this. I love the game and I want to be involved with it. So just don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Treat it as a hobby for the most part. The one thing that I do always say to people is do not drop everything for casting or commentating or even anything to do with esports until you are able to correctly calculate or correctly work out that it will be a potential full-time endeavor for yourself. For the first 5 years of my career, I did it A, alongside my studies, and then B, alongside a job. So and then I found a point where I was able to go full time with it. So don't ever go into esports or any kind of esports role unless you're being offered a full time contract on a reasonable wage, and just say I'm going to drop my entire life for this, because it's mostly not sustainable. So treat it as a hobby, practice, commentate over games and upload it to a YouTube channel, or just commentate over games and keep them saved on your computer to review. It doesn't have to be games that you're actually casting. You can record your own gameplay. You can download a Twitch VOD. You can download a YouTube VOD of a professional game, commentate over it, practice, find person to work with. That's a big tip. I think it's okay to commentate by yourself, but very, very rarely are you ever going to commentate a game purely by yourself. So go and try and find someone that you might want to work with and trying to build a rapport with. It's much easier to be recognized as a pairing than it is to be recognized as an individual when it comes to esports commentating. So that would be my biggest tips to people kind of getting involved.
Beautiful. And I think you brought up a huge point, actually, is the time that you spent where you may not have gotten paid. I think this younger generation sees esports and they see that the marketing is done so well. And they see, lots of dollar signs. They see prize pools and glorious events. I think the younger generation just thinks, hey, I can drop everything. And hey, mom, I'm going to be a professional mobile gamer. So I do like that you present that, hey, you need to have like your side projects and continue to do something. Do not sign something until, you can look ahead and see that it's fully sustainable. So that's like great advice.
Don't drop out of school for mobile esports, kids. Finish your education. And either find a way to pause your education if things are getting serious, or finish your education and take a break and sort of give it a go, your best shot once you've got that out of the way. That's my biggest piece of advice. Never drop out of school, but also don't quit a really good job as well for this kind of thing. Find a way. I know lots of people who went to university and paused before they went to university to give like mobile esports a go. I know there have been some really lenient schooling situations, and especially with the current world climate where a lot of the schooling, especially in the UK, is now being done from home. You might be able to find a way to work around your studies, but your studies are absolutely the number one priority. And then if things get serious, you can find a way with your teachers or with your parents, or even by yourself if you're old enough at that point, to kind of work it around and your life and see where you can go from there. But yeah, I agree with you. Don't drop out for mobile esports. It's just not worth it.
Oh yeah, sometimes we just gotta put them in check with a little bit of reality. So
it's just the dad advice, mate. Me and you just it is
the dad advice.
Dad advice.
Yes. So let's see my. All right. So if you could 1v1 one pro player, it could be on we'll say on Wild Rift, but we'll say all PC characters are allowed, and as well as and the PC abilities and passives are the same, but just on Wild Rift. Who would it be and why?
One pro player.
And it could be from the past. It doesn't have to be like current.
I would love to. I think I'm not one of those people that has like a favorite. I've never had a favorite player. I've kind of just enjoyed League of Legends, like PC esports. But I tell you what, I'd love to 1v1 the Baus. You probably don't know him. He's not actually like a professional player. Actually, you might know the Baus. He's a Scion one trick. He's a pretty popular League PC streamer who's part of some professional esports organizations. I believe he was like officially listed as a sub for some of them, even though I don't think he's ever played on the professional stage. But I'm a Scion one trick on PC. So I just love to have a 1v1 versus the Baus with just like double Scion one trick. He'd absolutely smash me, but I think I'd learn a hell of a lot on how to play Scion a little bit better.
Yeah, you could limit test yourself, and that's the whole point of the question. And maybe in a best of 3, maybe you get one game out. So it would be cool. I mean, especially since they're gonna be dropping ARAM soon. I'm excited for that. Like, it's really. Can you imagine the queues? They're gonna be even quicker. So
I think it's the best decision that Riot actually. I think it was the biggest announcement they made, because I think Wild Rift needs a casual game mode, because sometimes you don't want to log on and play a game of you don't want to log on and play a game of Summoner's Rift. You want to log on and just play something more casual like ARAM. So I actually think it was the best announcement they made in the 2021 trailer.
Yes, very slept on announcement. So that's pretty much all the questions. Any final thoughts or shout outs that you would like to give to anyone?
No, I'm just really excited for the future of Wild Rift. I'm hoping that the North American launch comes quickly and is successful. That's the one thing that I think is really holding back a lot of the player base across the Western regions at the moment, as I know there's a lot of North American people that are really excited for it, especially the Brazil, like not even just in America, but the Brazilian crowd is like, they are nutty for mobile games. And I know there's a lot of Brazilian fans that are super into League of Legends, and I think are excited about Wild Rift. So once it launches in Brazil, I think you're going to see things really skyrocket, because I think that's going to be a huge deal for Wild Rift. But yeah, I'm just really excited for the year. I think I'm really excited for the esports stuff that's coming down the pipeline. And obviously a big shout out to all of the amazing content creators that work within the space. Like, I think if you guys aren't supporting them, you should definitely support them. Support this podcast. Clearly, this is an amazing podcast. Support like the YouTubers like Assassin Dave, Yikes, people like that. And the streamers, like a lot of the pro players like Leon and Clamares and people like that. So just go out there and support the content creators. Your support for their content is going to be the difference maker when it comes to Wild Rift's success. And I think that's what we all want. We want Wild Rift to be successful.
Absolutely. So thank you for coming on. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. For a while on the Rift, I'm Legacy, saying thanks for watching.